Hi, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. I think we're going to go ahead and stream live now, and we'll wait for folks to start joining in. Today, we're doing another episode of ENO8 Answers, and really excited about this topic today. I think it's something that touches at sort of the core of what people are trying to accomplish when they're developing new digital products. And what the topic is today is, building great products that dazzle our customers and don't blow the budget, right? And so again, sort of two things that are really big fears and objectives at the same time for new product development. And so, really wanting to build the right thing, build something that's useful for customers, and also too to do it without blowing a budget that you have planned for the project. And so bear with us a little bit today. This is a new sort of approach for us to do NO8 answers. We typically do these more of like a webinar format. We thought we would try a live stream today and see if that makes it a little easier for some of our audience to join in and see kind of what we're talking about. So if we have a few hiccups here technically, just bear with us. It's kind of a little bit of a new approach for us today that we're kind of excited to try out. Um, I'm going to switch over to share some slides. And so let me flip this over here. And all right. So, like I said, so our topic today is, secrets to building great products that dazzle customers and don't blow the budget. Just a quick little bit of background on me. A lot of you probably already know who I am, but for those that don't, my name's Jeff Francis. I'm one of the co-founders of ENO8. We're a digital innovation studio. We're based here in Dallas, Texas. Me personally, I've worked with over 100 startups to help build and launch their digital product, as well as probably over 50 mid-sized to enterprise companies that are creating new products or really significantly updating existing products. And um, so let's jump into my first point. So I've kind of divided this into four main points that I thought would be a good way for us to summarize how to really build great products and do it within sort of a plan, a budget, a timeline, that kind of thing. So the first one is get clarity, right? And this can cover a broad bucket of things. So I'm gonna kind of pull up a handful of questions that I'm sort of referring to here when I'm talking about getting clarity. And having clarity, or rather a lack of clarity, is one of the things that I think plagues product development perhaps the most, because it can show up in so many different ways. And so some common ones that I think are really good to make sure that you really are clear about and have a good understanding of is, why are we building this? So if it's a new product, understanding, why are we building this? What is our premise for thinking that this is a good use of time and resources? And there's different ways to go at that type of question. One could be, that we are clear about the pain that we're solving with our product, and we are clear that there are not great alternatives in the space, right? Those are a couple of things I would be looking for. Also, too, that we have a good understanding of the user. So this last point that's on this slide here, I'll jump down to that one. Like having a good, clear picture of the user. What problem are we solving for them? Why are they going to really be excited about this? And you'll hear us talk about that we really believe in building a minimum lovable product, an MLP, versus MVP, which is minimum viable product. So at NO8, our personal philosophy is that the MVP is a bad way to build software. It's outdated. There's a much better way to do it, and that is the MLP. And so when you're talking about minimum lovable product, you're really trying to boil this down to, what is the minimum lovable element of this new product? And by lovable, it means it needs to be compelling enough that people will want to use it and that they'll be excited to use it, but also too that it solves a significant enough problem that would cause them to love it in the first place. So why are we building this? Being really clear on that, feeling strong about that. What problems does it solve? Next one here is, have we defined success clearly, right? How are you going to know if you're successful if you don't define it from the very beginning? And you'd be surprised to know that very oftentimes people get super deep into product development efforts, and they really haven't even defined how are we going to know if we hit the target yet or not, right? And I can guarantee you that if you don't define what does success look like, you'll never get there. You'll never achieve it. Nobody will ever feel good about it, right? And then that sort of rolls into this next point that I marked here is, are the stakeholders aligned? This is another one that people don't really think about when they're setting out to build something new, but very oftentimes a misalignment of stakeholders kills products. You could build something great, but if stakeholders aren't aligned, it can still kill the overall effort. And so let's talk a little bit about what does that mean. It takes a lot of different team members or players to launch a product, right? It takes someone with a vision, it takes money, it takes resources, it takes talent, it takes planning, right? It takes a business view of why are we building this, right? So there's all these different elements, and most of the time these are covered by different stakeholders, right? And so stakeholders could be people like investors, a management team, right? The engineers that are actually doing the development work, the designers, the testing team, the product owner. Um, I would throw customers in that bucket, right? I think that customers could be stakeholders, right? Especially if they are people that you're already working with and servicing and you're looking to build or extend products, that kind of thing. So, um, are stakeholders aligned? And so when we talk about how do we get them aligned, think through these other questions that we went through, right? Are all the stakeholders on the same page of this is a problem worth solving? Um, how do we define the success? What are our metrics? What are we going to be looking for? That kind of thing, right? So getting that clarity helps to ensure that everybody is sort of marching in step towards the same goal. Another thing that I'll mention here as a recent example is getting sign-offs and keeping the stakeholders updated on the progress and how the vision's coming together. And so one example of how this could show up would be, once you actually start designing, and let's say that you're creating a design prototype, being able to share that, circulate it with stakeholders, get their buy-in that like, yes, we are still on the same page, that we're capturing our vision correctly, can go a long way to help make sure that you don't go build something and then later on you identify that maybe there's a disconnect, right? So get clarity, the first big point. Let's move on to the next one. Have a plan, right? So we need to have clarity. Clarity gets us a lot of confidence. It helps solve a lot of the things that typically plague these types of initiatives. And then next, you really want to make sure you have a good plan. So what does that look like? Let's go through a few of these. One of my favorite things that I like to talk about is a concept that we call validation gates. And maybe other people have called it that, or they have a different term for it. I like to think that I kind of coined this term, but maybe it's out there already. So if it is, I'm sorry for taking credit for it. But what do I mean when I say validation gates? Validation gates means being clear about what milestones or checkpoints do you need to pass through and confirm that you're seeing what you need in order to move on, right? So let's talk about some examples. What could a validation gate mean? One validation gate could be that, hey, before we go to development, we're going to have a design prototype and we're going to focus group it with some potential users, engage the feedback on our hypothesis of what is our minimum lovable element of this product, right? Like we're going to have a prototype, we're going to show it to potential customers, and we're going to get validation from them that confirms that our hunch is correct, right? That could be a validation gate. And so once you do that, a couple things will happen. One is you'll show it to them, they'll go crazy, they'll love it, you'll feel really good about your concept, and you're going to go to the next stage with much more confidence, right? Another thing could happen where they're kind of cold on it, right? Maybe you don't maybe they look at it and they don't think that it's as good of a solution as you might think it is, right? And then you just need to huddle up and figure out like, hey, let's examine this feedback, figure out what we need to take from it, perhaps readjust our approach, or in extreme cases, maybe you decide not to move forward on the initiative, which if you're doing it at this stage, that's success, right? It's better to figure it out, get your validation or the lack of validation as early as possible. So create these validation gates. Figure out like at what point can you get the maximum amount of validation for the least invested time, money, resources, and keep doing it. Never stop this, right? So some other examples of validation gates could be, you've done the design prototype, you focus group it, you build like your minimum lovable product. So what's the key killer feature? Build something that works, go back to users, get input on it, get your stakeholders to look at it, get the feedback. If you like what you're seeing, then move on to the next stage, which is, potentially adding new features, right? And so I'm a big fan of trying to figure out validation, but then also keeping a clear picture on where am I where am I going to start to generate revenue, right? Because that has to be on your plan for validation gates, right? As soon as possible, figure out, is there a way to generate revenue from this product in most cases? Some exceptions could be if you're building an internal product, perhaps. That may not be like the key driver, but you still need to define success and you still need to have validation gates. Another question that goes along with knowing whether you have a good plan or not is, what do we build first, right? Like being really clear about what is it that you need to build, what order do you need to build it, and how are you going to release it could also be a part of this, I think, right? So again, back to our concept of getting max validation with minimal effort and investment. So looking at your roadmap, understanding what order are we going to build things in, and and understanding like maybe what the first thing is that we're going to build, right? So, what do we build first? Next is what technical approach should we use, right? This should be a part of your plan. Um, Oftentimes, projects that even are successful initially fail later on because they really had major technical or more architectural type of issues. And so, having a clear plan and knowing that you've dug into that to a level that's sufficient for you to have confidence and flexibility built into your approach, um, keeping in mind what are you trying to accomplish in the near term and what's the longer term vision, kind of looking at it through both of those lenses is a great way, I think, to look at your technical approach. I could talk a lot about that point. So if you guys have questions on that, ping the chat. We'll come back to some of those. Another one is, do we need a design prototype, right? Why do I mention this as part of a plan? That may seem out of place to some of you, but here's why I put this on here. A lot of the effort in coming up with the plan is driving that alignment that I talked about under our first slide, right? And I find that a design prototype is one of the best tools in our arsenal to help drive alignment across stakeholders that all communicate very differently and have varying comfort levels with technical and user experience elements, right? And so a design prototype as part of the planning phase really brings a lot of that clarity to what exactly are we building? What are we building right now? And how will we know when we've achieved that step, right? And so I'm a big fan of the design prototype being part of this sort of plan phase, right? And this is the one that everybody's going to be asking about. How much budget do we need? So how much is it going to cost? And that's not exactly a simple question. We've got some pretty good content that we've written and spoke about why estimates for digital products are so widely varied, based on going to different partners or checking out different options to have it built. And there's a lot of real good reasons for why that is the case. So having a plan and having a good plan means you have a high degree of confidence that your budget number is going to be pretty close, right? And so some things to think about there when you're coming up with your budget is understanding like how did I arrive at these numbers, right? And doing sort of a bottoms up kind of estimate. And another way that I like to go about this is a lot of times is looking at what kind of budget we have for each phase or each one of those validation gates that we sort of talked about earlier, and and tying our budget to meeting validation gates. I always like to say that people feel a lot more confident about investing additional budget if they are hitting targets, for validation before they have to make their next investment, right? And so it builds confidence with the team. It builds confidence with the investors or the executives that are approving budgets. And so understanding, what is this budget tied to in terms of success or progress towards our product goal. Um, and the last one here is how long will it take, right? So timeline. Again, chopping this into pieces. How can I achieve my goals? How much time am I going to need to do that? And like really understanding where your numbers came from. One question I'll toss into the mix here before I move on to the next point is when we're talking about budget, we're talking about timeline, or talking about the technical approach for that matter. One question I like to ask our team and everybody involved is, if we are going to be wrong, where would you guess today that that probably is going to happen? Where are we going to be wrong, right? And really that's sort of a teaser question that just serves to understand different point of views on the team, and you'll be surprised the insights that you can get a lot of time when you ask that question. So that question is, if it turns out that we're wrong about budget, why would you guess that would probably turn out to be the case? Or, on the technical approach, if we turn out to be wrong about our technical approach, if you had to guess today, where do you think that would come from? Right. And then just digging into that and examining. So, a good question to ask your team there. So my third main point is assembling the right team. So we start off, we have clarity, we have a plan. Now we got to assemble the right team. And so what kinds of things do we think about here? Let me pull up a few questions here and we'll go through these together. So first question I put is, what roles will need to be accounted for? So this is basically taking inventory of what are we going to build and what type of team is it going to take to build it, right? And so some examples of roles or talent that you might need to have is you're going to need to have people who are the visionary, right? Both technical and design visionaries, right? And this could be in addition to a product visionary. So someone wearing the product manager or product owner role is a must-have. You're probably going to need someone on there that is a UX or designer that's going to help actually create the visuals, understand the user flows, and that's probably a deeper topic. I don't want to get into that too deep, but really making sure you understand the distinction between user experience and a UI, or more of a visual designer, and you're going to need both of those elements. And so having someone to cover that properly, having someone to cover the technical design is going to be important. Who's actually going to do the development work? Who's actually going to be doing the coding? Who actually is going to be the person that's ensuring quality and testing? And so I would encourage you to be really honest about what those roles are, and do you really have that covered with your current team, right? And so that kind of bleeds into the second question there I had about what specific talent will be really important. And why do I say it will be really important? Different products have different challenges, and different products also have different aspects of them that make them important or valuable. Sometimes it's particularly technical, right? Sometimes it's more focused on user experience or the design or the overall flow of the application, right? And sometimes it can be both, right? But if we look at this and we understand that, for example, this product has something very unique about it technically, or the technical aspects of it are the linchpin of success, then you're going to want to make sure that you've got specific talent is really going to be able to cover that, and that you feel very confident in their past experience and capabilities that it'll apply really good to this scenario. And so, looking at, what is it unique about your product and what specific talent is going to be really important there is going to be a question that you want to make sure you feel comfortable about. And then, who do I already have on my team? Maybe as you're looking around and you're deciding, what team am I going to need for this? What specific talent does that going to include? You look around at your own team and determine, do I already have that? Right? Sometimes you will. In larger organizations, maybe you already have this. But don't be tricked into thinking that just because those people are on your team, that means they're going to be available, right? So that's another thing. But big organizations have very talented and large development teams a lot of times. But the problem is that they've got other stuff on their plate. So if you're trying to take on a new product initiative, I see it a lot where these initiatives keep getting pushed to the back of the line because there's other more pressing stuff that keeps jumping the line in front of them. So not only is it, do I have them on my team, but are they going to be available, and are they going to be able to give enough bandwidth and attention to this to really do it justice, right? If not, you got to figure out how to cover that. Where are the holes in my team? So that could come from, the point I just mentioned. I've got the talent, but they're just not available, or they don't have the bandwidth, or it could just be plain out, I don't have that person on my team, right? Maybe this scenario is a little bit more common with startups or smaller companies, where you really have to have some of this super skilled, super niche, more rare type of talent in order to cover it properly. But you don't really have the need to have that person full time on your team, right? So that's a hole. You need to cover it and figure out what your plan is for that. And then the last question here is, in assembling your team, what if I misstep on the team I've created? That's going to happen. And everybody would like to think that they're going to knock it out of the park with the first version of the team that they assemble, but that's very rarely going to happen, right? Um, the times that does happen is going to be where you've got a team that has already worked together in the roles specified, on multiple projects, or for a very long on a previous project before. That would be a scenario that would maybe give you a much better odds of success of hitting the target right out of the gate with sort of the first version of your team. Other times, you're just going to need to make sure that you're assessing, and you're being really honest about, like, how the team's performing. Are all the roles getting covered? And then making adjustments along the way. So how do you do that? A couple of quick thoughts on that. We could talk about that one a whole lot also, but just to give you some tips on things that I would go towards if that was something I was seeing, is I would try to first start by being really clear on what are roles on the team, right? And if I'm seeing problems or we're not getting our results, one, what is the result that I was expecting to see that I'm not seeing? And can I easily trace that missed expectation to one of the roles on the team? Forget about people. Let's just focus on roles first, right? So if, for example, we're not starting and stopping sprints on time, right? There's no schedule. That could be a role for the scrum master or the project manager on the team. So first I'm going to go, okay, great. Do I have somebody that's specified to that role? If so, then let's examine more. Are they clear on what's expected out of that role? If not, I need to go communicate that, tighten that up. If they are clear, then do they have the capability to do this, right? So going through these sets of questions to examine, where is the hole on the team, and what kinds of adjustments do I need to potentially make? Sometimes it's as simple as just having a conversation and getting on the same page about expectations. Other times it might involve making a change to the team member in some form or fashion, right? So that's assembling the right team. So we've talked about get clarity, have a good plan, assemble the right team. Now let's close the loop, assess results, and make adjustments. And so, I'm a big fan of KPIs and measurements, right? So we'll talk a little bit about that. So um, here's kind of the four main points I want to talk about on this bucket. So assess results and make adjustments. Know your key metrics. So how do you know your key metrics? Well, go back to the first slide and think about defining our success criteria. If we can clearly define what is success, then the next step is to determine, well, how are we going to measure it, right? And there's your key metrics. That's usually the simplest way to arrive at those. Sometimes there's some technical challenges to getting to, well, exactly how do I execute on some sort of data capture for gathering that information. But knowing your key metrics to start with will then allow you to take the next step and figure out, well, how do I measure that, from a execution standpoint. But then be reviewing this, right? You need to be looking at it regularly so you understand how you're tracking towards those goals. These can also be tied to the validation gates that we talked about earlier, right? The next one is involve stakeholders in the review. This is super important, right? For instance, if you have investors that aren't looking at the data with you, right, then chances are they're not going to be very satisfied, right? Because one, they're not included in the path or the process of evaluating it, right? So they may make the assumption that nobody's looking at it. Next, they need to be incorporated in the conversation around how are we doing? Are we doing great? Awesome. How do we do more of it? What's the next step? Or are we off track? Are we not hitting our targets that we wanted, right? Great. Let's bring it up and have a plan for how do we respond. Either way, having stakeholders involved in this review process And I'm a big fan top to bottom, right? It includes engineers, includes QA, includes product people, includes design people. Involve the team in reviewing your metrics and understanding how are we doing together, because it is a team effort. Next is revisit your success criteria. So that kind of goes along with looking at your metrics, but every time you do some of these assessments and these look backs, you have to go back and remind yourself what was our original goals, right? Like, and how are we tracking towards that success criteria? And then the next point here is looking forward, right? What's the next validation gate? So we're looking back, seeing how we did, making adjustments if we need to. Now let's reset and look forward. What's our next objective? What's our next validation gate that we need to pass through, right? And I mentioned it earlier, but think of these validation gates. I think a good way to think about, like, what is a validation gate is, when's the next time you're going to have to go back to get additional budget approved, right? Because nothing will help you with getting budget approved like being able to demonstrate a track record of setting success criteria and then crushing those goals. So when you think about validation gates, think about, like, at what point am I going to have to go back and like get like another tranche of funding approved or another budget approved, that kind of thing. Those are typically really good places to think about your validation gates. And so what is next? And then define that objective, and then make sure you've got a way to measure that, right? So let's recap. We've got basically 4 main buckets: get clarity, have a plan, assemble the right team, and assess results and make adjustments. Hope this has been helpful, guys. I'll take a quick look in the chat and cut over for my slides to see if there's any questions that are coming through in the chat, and I can try to address some of those. So if just bear with me a second, let me take a look over here and kind of looking. I'm not sure if I'm seeing any questions coming in, but you know, I'll just kind of jump onto our next slide here, and if I see something come in, I can always cut right over. So you know, if you have any questions on the stuff that we covered today, would love to hear about those. You know, drop us an email at info@eno8.com. That's ENO and the number 8.com. You can drop an email there. One of us from the team will see it. We'll respond back. And then, you know, of course, reach out to me and connect on LinkedIn. We post a lot of this kind of content. We'd love to just sort of facilitate the conversation. And as you can tell, love talking about this kind of stuff. So would love to hear from you. Actually, it looks like I had a question just come in. So, hey, Jeff, how would you suggest companies define the cut list of features for the MLP versus waiting longer to announce the product? This is a good question, and we get this. This is common all the time, right? So basically, you know, and I think this came in from Tim. So Tim's saying, how would you suggest companies define the cut list of features for the MLP versus waiting longer to announce the product? So really the decision of, should I expand the scope and include more in there, which is going to probably push my timeline out and defer us being able to get something out, versus move our cut line up on our feature list and leave some stuff off. Generally speaking, I really try to push as hard as possible to move that cut line up to what is minimum lovable, right? And so when I think about especially V1s of products that we're launching, I try to really reduce it down to, like, what is the killer feature? Like, even if I think about this, like I can only launch with a feature that's compelling enough to just get people to start using something that they love, and then rapidly iterate or expand on it. Can I reduce this down to a feature? Which sounds kind of ridiculous, but if it's more of a thought exercise, think about, like, if I had to choose it down to one, what is the lovable thing? And that one needs to be slot number 1 usually. Beyond that, like trying to figure out, like, what aligns with the validation gates. You know, like looking at, like, from a business standpoint, what's most important in order for my business to be able to take the next step. So take the product backlog out of the picture entirely and just look at this from a high level business standpoint, right? So I recently had a conversation with a client where they've got a product. They've done a great job of getting it out into the market with sort of a soft launch. And fortunately / unfortunately, they're starting to get a lot of user adoption. right? And so now they're looking at this going, okay, like what do we need to prioritize to do next? And the batch of work that we sort of worked through, identifying and estimating for them, came out to be like really big, a lot bigger than anybody thinks is really what we need to do. And so we simply had a conversation about revisiting, like, what does the business need right now, right? And the conversation started moving towards, well, like we're just kind of getting an initial version of this into the marketplace. The founders are self-funding this stuff. It'd make us all feel a lot better if we're generating revenue. Okay, good way to think about this. So what is our obstacles to generating revenue right now, right? And so, well, we need to get subscriptions in, or we need to get this other feature in. So we start to think about, okay, what's the shortest path between, we're starting to get really good validation from like a set of users from sort of a soft launch, but now we need to generate revenue. What's holding us back on that? After having that conversation, we were able to really carve up that backlog and reduce it down to just one or two features that were pretty manageable. And now we get to another validation gate. So I hope that helps, Tim. That's kind of how I'd go to it, is a couple of things about, like, looking at it through the lens of validation, um, the business objectives, and then when all else fails, create a time box and force yourself to make it fit. So that would be my last tip. Um, let's see. Got another one came in. Hi Jeff. What are the major pillars for a successful project, like technology, team, stakeholder, planning? What are the major pillars for a successful project? So, I mean, in terms of pillars, I would call these pillars, right? Like clarity, a solid plan, the right team, and a way to assess your results, right? But within those, there's some other nuance that might be worth talking about. Um, not to like, promote like our services too much, but we have a really unique offering called the Innovation Lab, and it's really focused on these first 2 points: creating clarity and then having a good plan. And so, having clarity around, the product vision itself, but also to the technical elements of it, the design elements of it. So what I like to do to be able to sort of check those boxes and feel like I've done enough for that is looking at a certain set of artifacts that we typically go to. I've got a great slide for it. I don't happen to have it in here. If you'll direct message me, or send us an email to info@eno8.com, I can send you the slide. But some of these artifacts that we create that we really think helps with those pillars is things like, having a high level, architecture, right? I'm not talking about super low level. I'm talking about at least high level, and then defending it, across a couple of different stakeholders. Another one could be a design prototype. Um, this could be like a Figma clickable prototype. Some people use like Adobe XD or Envision. So there's a lot of tools for it out there. But having a design prototype, I feel like, creates a lot of clarity and helps you get to a better plan, right? Other ones are being clear on your user personas, the user journey. That's one that's massively overlooked by people, but I think is really valuable. Is mapping that user journey and then using that user journey to identify where the real opportunities are to best serve the user and provide a lot of value. So a lot of people just skip that step or don't even know what it is. So user journeys are really important. Most engineers go to like technical design, like architecture diagrams, that kind of stuff. Like, what's important there is, I think the high level of it is super important really early on, but then you need to progressively revisit it and make sure that it aligns with your immediate needs and your longer term vision. And so, um, one last point that I'll throw in here that's probably worth mentioning is that there's sort of these two different school of thoughts that compete with one another a lot of times. There's more of like what I would consider like an older school of thought, which is more of a waterfall approach, right? And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have more of a pure agile approach. And there's things that are great about both of these different approaches. But the reason why I mention it here is that on one end of the spectrum, waterfall is very heavy on doing all of your planning up front, having a lot of precise detail on every task and every step of the way. Um, Agile is a lot more loose, right? And it's more adaptive along the way. Here's a pitfall of both of them, and a quick take from me. One is that waterfall, it's easy to get bogged down in planning, and you never actually move the effort forward, right? Or you spend so much time and money on planning, right, that you evaporate, your enthusiasm and your budget and your resources before you can actually even get something in the hands of users to validate. On the other end of the spectrum with Agile, I've seen budgets completely get blown by just agiling your way through product development. And so if you're taking more of a hard Agile approach, which we tend to do more Agile development, it's still important to have at least a sufficient level of the direction that you're going, having your North Star in the form of these plans, this technical plan, your design prototype, your validation gates. You still want to prioritize getting at least a sufficient level of depth there where you can guide the Agile and kind of constrain it to budgets and time boxes that are a little bit easier managed. So I'm not sure if that's exactly your question, but hopefully that helps. Let me see here if we got another one before we start wrapping up. I think that was the two that I saw. It looks like somebody might be typing a new question, so I'll give them just a minute to see if that shows up. If not, we'll go ahead and kind of wrap up. Great. Well, I think we'll go ahead and wrap up here, guys. It looks like it looks like somebody's typing a question, but I don't see it coming through. So we'll go ahead and move on. Just to kind of wrap up, for again, thank you for joining. I hope there's some information in here that might be of value to you guys. If you like it, let us know. If you don't like it, let us know that too. Be interested in your feedback. Please share it if you think there's others that might be interested in this. Please share and pass the information along. I think this will get posted to LinkedIn, so you'll be able to share the link or tag somebody in the comments, which is a great way to bring their attention to it. If you'd like to have any information on our innovation lab at ENO8, it's awesome. We'd love to talk about it. I love talking about it. So if you want to check out some high-level information, go out to our website at eno8.com/innovation-lab. It's got some great information out there. Other than that, we hope you enjoyed the information today. And thank you guys again for joining us. We'll talk to you soon.